Morning, folks. It is 10 a.m. here on the sunny Gold Coast. I have my full cup of coffee. No bad days. We like a good day.
Sure.
And I am here with Ding Dong, who's at my front door. No other than Mr. Dweezil Zappa. Hey, Dweezil.
Hey, how are you?
I'm going good, man. I'm going good. Thank you for taking the time to come and join me.
Sure, no problem.
Now, I'm sure people will let me know if I have any echo going on because, as luck would have it, I turned on my other computer at the last minute to check that things were streaming and it wanted to take control of my headphones. So folks, if you hear any annoying echo going on, please let me know and I'll tend to that. But other than that, I'm good to go. Dweezil.
All right.
I usually start these, as I said to you, by simply asking my guests while I sip away on my coffee, what started the love affair with the electric guitar?
Well, for me, I always saw my dad playing guitar ever since I was little growing up. He played different guitars, either on stage or at home or in the studio. So over the years, I would start to see certain guitars and they would give me a different feeling. What I really liked was when my dad was playing the SG, because the horns were it looked kind of like a bat or something. It was like for a little while, it reminded me of Batman or something
Cool.
when I was a kid, so I just thought it looked cool. And other guitars that he played looked cool as well, but it wasn't until much later on that I realized certain elements of them, whether it was a Les Paul or a Telecaster or a Stratocaster, the different things that make those guitars have a personality. He had a guitar that was given to him by Jimi Hendrix that was burned, and it used to just be sitting on the wall, just the body of it. And in the mid 70s, he decided to have it put back together, but he did some interesting things to it. He had a transducer pickup that was put underneath the neck so that it picked up. It was like the same kind of pickup that you would put on like a marimba or something.
Cool.
So it picked up the noise of the neck and finger noise and things like that, and he could blend that in. So it was almost like an acoustic element. It was before guitars had piezo pickups and stuff like that. So he had that plus all these other extra electronics and different pickups in this thing, and he brought it back to life. And that guitar I used to really love to see because it had been burned up, but then it came back to life with these other pieces, and it was burned up wood, but then it had a brass bridge and a brass nut and this bird's eye maple neck that was on it and all these extra knobs, and it was just such a cool guitar. So the look of the guitars evoked a certain kind of feeling, and I just remember at a certain point thinking I'd like to be able to play guitar. My dad's music was always so complicated and sophisticated sounding. I knew you had to know a lot about music to do what he did. And that was really the only music I heard growing up. Until I was about 12, I started to hear the radio and hear music at my friends' houses and things like that. So at that point, the biggest, most popular music in the world was hard rock or metal. And Van Halen was the biggest band in the world. At least in California, that was the biggest band you could imagine. And but I was also hearing music from Ozzy Osbourne with Randy Rhoads playing guitar, and of course AC/DC and Led Zeppelin and a lot of these kinds of bands. But I got introduced also maybe a little before that to things that were in my dad's record collection. So albums from Queen or The Who or Jimi Hendrix. And I learned about the Beatles and things like that. But the thing for me was my dad's music was so orchestral and so broad in all the arrangements that when I started to hear normal music on the radio, I thought to myself, where's the rest of it? Because
Yeah, right.
it was much more simplistic compared to the music I had grown up hearing. So I had to adjust to that, but it also made guitar-centric music easier for me to focus on. So that's why Van Halen and Randy Rhoads playing with Ozzy Osbourne, which was just so much about the guitar, was an immediate attraction where I thought, I want to learn to do that because I can really hear that. That's really jumping out to me. I like the playing, but I also like the sound, especially Edward Van Halen's guitar sound. There was just nothing like that. You know, there's only a few people that created guitar sounds that became so instantaneously addictive to your ear where you thought to yourself, I don't know what that is, but I want to know what that is. I want to know how to do that. How can I make that sound? So, you know, Jimi Hendrix was a huge catalyst in that. And of course, Eddie Van Halen, same impact, or arguably even greater impact for a guitar style, for it to take over and people want to learn what he was doing. So all that stuff was hitting right around that time. I mean, Van Halen's debut album came out in '78, but I started really hearing all that music around 1980, '81. So not too long after it was pretty new on the scene. And I was just enamored with the sound, and I wanted to figure out how to do that. And that's what happened.
Yeah, yeah. Man, you said around the 80, 81. To me, that's my favorite era of Eddie's sound. He really had it nailed around that time, I feel.
Well, I mean, my favorite record is Fair Warning. And so that one, I think that came out in 1981 or early 1982. I can't remember offhand, but that is the period where he was at his most innovative in terms of his playing, and his sound was just incredible on that record. But the funny thing is, on that tour, his guitar sound was nothing like the record.
Really?
It was a much thinner sound. And if you listen to any of the rare bootlegs that are out there from that tour, it was almost as if something was wrong with the equipment on that tour.
Wow.
Because it was really a thin sound, almost like a Telecaster sometimes. So it was interesting that the record itself would have so much bottom end and such a great mid-range element to it, and then the actual tone live was drastically different.
Why do you think that is?
I think it might have had to do with the wireless system and some of the things that were involved with putting on a massive show of that level.
Yep.
With that much equipment, and maybe the bootlegs that are around from that time, because there's no proper recordings other than there's some videos from Oakland. There's 3 videos that people know, Unchained, Hear About It Later, and So This Is Love. And even those, it's a thinner sound than the Fair Warning album itself, but not as thin as what you hear in some of the bootlegs. So I'm not sure, maybe there was like an out of phase issue or something at some point in the PA on some of these bootlegs or something, but it's remarkably thin at times.
I'm wondering if that's got something to do with him using the Variac as his legend in the studio versus not taking that out live. I wonder if that's got something to do with it.
I don't know that it does, but you know, everything having to do with the studio and how something's captured, there's all kinds of little magic fairy dust that, okay, you might have 85 to 95% of your sound that's happening in the room, but that's having to be captured by microphones, tape machine, EQ, compression, and those little things in the right combination can elevate that already great sound that you might have to the next level. And that combination that they had for that particular record was really magical. It's an incredible sound that every time I hear it, I get inspired. I mean, I can turn it on and I can be right back to hearing it for the first time, thinking I'm energized by just the sound and what the feeling I get from it. And on the podcast that I do, which is called Running with the Dweezil, where we talk about Van Halen and we go song by song in detail with different guitar guests, and we talk about production, we talk about the sounds, the equipment, all that stuff. But one of the things that comes up is that the description of the feeling that you get from hearing that music is fuck yeah. you put it on and you're like, fuck yeah, that sounds good. You just get excited about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get that feeling from any music now. So Van Halen, the blend of those guys, especially for classic Van Halen, the first 6 albums, there's something about that fuck yeah ingredient that is in there because it's all those 4 different personality types, the perfect timing, everything all came together for them to be what they were. And they were really at the apex right around Fair Warning. I mean, that's just, for me, that's pretty clear and pretty obvious. But I mean, they've had a lot of great music over the years, but I think that is the record and the time frame where every time I listen to it, it doesn't matter how many years it's been since I've listened to it, I can still get that excitement from that particular sound and that record.
Absolutely. So when the bug hit you and you heard Van Halen and you got that fuck yeah feeling, what was the next step for you? Did you hit Dad up and say, can you show me some chords, or how do I get started?
Well, I got a guitar when I was 6, and it was a Music Master, so that's kind of like a Duosonic, a little short range Fender guitar, short scale, and I had a pig nose amp, and so I had a cable, I had the amp which you could either run on a battery or plug into the wall, and then I had the guitar. I didn't really know anything about it. I just kind of banged on the strings and made some noise with it, but I didn't know what to do with it when I was 6 or 8 years old. It wasn't until I was 12 when I started to hear the music that we were talking about, where in my head, when the music was not playing, I could still hear it and be thinking, I want to hear, or I want to be able to do that. And that was the motivation to sit there with the guitar and just kind of figure out what was happening. And to get a jump start on technique and ideas about what you're supposed to do with the instrument, I got a few lessons from the guitar player in my dad's band, who at the time was Steve Vai. And he was 20 or 21 years old, and I was 12. And so my dad said, hey, Steve, can you show Dweezil a couple of things? And he made a little notebook where he drew out some scales and some chords. And my first lesson, I could barely do anything. I couldn't put anything together at all. So he went back to my dad and he's like, I don't think he's ever going to be cut out for this. He's not really able to make any of this connect.
Yeah.
But then the next week, I had put a bunch of stuff together and it was a whole different ballgame. And week after week, I was making rapid improvements to the point where the first thing I ever recorded in the studio was, I'd only been playing guitar for 9 months. And it just happened to be through a series of crazy circumstances that Edward Van Halen would produce that first song that I made. So me and my 12-year-old friends who had this little band and we'd only barely been playing, we were in the studio with Edward Van Halen and Don Landy, who was the engineer who recorded the classic Van Halen albums. They were the producer engineer team at my dad's home studio, and we made 2 songs. And I got to learn how the studio worked, how to do recording, how to punch in, how to play along with things, and all that stuff. I had a crash course from Edward Van Halen and Don Landy showing that stuff to me when I was 12 years old and never had been in the studio doing that at all. So it was a crazy, crazy experience.
That's setting the benchmark pretty high straight up, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was amazing. And it's not lost on me that was an amazing experience. And it was just crazy how it came about anyway, because only weeks before doing that, we got a call to the house. It was somebody purporting to be Edward Van Halen. Now, back then, you had no way of knowing anything about artists. You saw their album covers, you saw the liner notes, and if you were lucky, you might hear them on a radio interview, or maybe there was a TV interview, just maybe. But we didn't have MTV or any of the social media kind of stuff where you can see into people's private lives and all that kind of stuff. There was nothing to indicate even the sound of Edward Van Halen's voice.
Yeah.
So it could have just been anybody saying that he was Eddie Van Halen.
Yep.
But my dad ended up saying, well, okay, well, come on over. And the call came in, and about 15 minutes later, he was at the house. So it was like the it's you can't even describe how crazy that feeling was, because here he was, arguably the most famous musician in the world at that time, and he just shows up at the house.
I think I've read stories about it. Is it true he showed up in he's like Ferrari or Lamborghini in the jumpsuit?
Yeah, he was in the Lamborghini truck, that those Lamborghini trucks that used to be part of the Iraqi army. So it was like a big SUV style Lamborghini, and you could hear it from at least 3 blocks away as it was approaching.
Wow.
And he shows up and he's got the Women and Children First jumpsuit on, the Van Halen necklace with the Van Halen logo, and no shirt. It's the same outfit essentially from the Women and Children First album. And then he had a guitar, not in a case that he was holding. It was a purple guitar with a humbucker in the neck and in the bridge, which was rare because he was known for only just having the bridge humbucker.
Sure.
And it had a piece of tape over the headstock so you couldn't see the name of the brand of guitar. He was saying, "Oh, I'm about to endorse this brand of guitar. I can't tell you what it is, but here's one of the guitars." So as soon as he came in, of course, I asked him to start playing. I said, "How do you play Eruption? How do you play Mean Street?" And he started playing all that stuff up close. So I was able to see exactly how he was doing that stuff. And then he handed the guitar to me, and of course I could barely play anything. But that evening, that purple guitar got passed around. My dad invited Steve Vai to come over. So it was Edward Van Halen, my dad, Steve Vai, and me, and this guitar just kind of passing around in a circle. Everybody would play a little bit, tell some stories or talk about guitar, and it was the craziest thing. He was there from, I want to say, around like 9 o'clock till almost 2 in the morning.
You do realize, like, to the average person, how mind-blowing that is, right?
Oh yeah,
Like
even to me still. I
room.
mean, it's the craziest thing.
Yeah. Wow. So, learning from Steve Vai and then having Edward Van Halen sort of showing you the ropes, what do you think you got out of that other people wouldn't get? Is there like some little sacred piece of knowledge that each person handed over to you?
Well, we live in a day and age now where any information you want, you can just Google it, or you can go on YouTube and find a video of some instruction on how to do virtually anything. So in terms of guitar, there wasn't anything like that, even close to that. So for example, back when, at that time, when there was notation or even tablature showing how to play something like Eruption or Spanish Fly, they indicated that as notation for flamenco style picking and left hand positions instead of hammer on, tapping kind of stuff. So nothing about showing anybody how to do something was correct. If you looked at that and you tried to learn it like with flamenco style picking and left hand stuff, not only does it not sound like what Ed was doing, it's really hard to play that stuff that way. And you have to have the really good flamenco technique, etc.
Yep.
So, but watching him just do it, it was instant instruction in the same way that you can watch a video. But this was burned into my mind. Like I would never unsee that because I was so focused on that. And I had already tried to imagine, how is he doing this stuff? And so what I really learned from it was he did a lot of things that had open strings. He would play something and then he would pull off to an open string. And I didn't realize that that was even an option. But when I saw that he was doing things like that, it made sense. I saw all the positions where he was playing certain things. So when I tried to learn it, I remembered, oh, well, he was up around this area when he was playing it, when I saw him play that part. And that helped because on the guitar, for people that don't know, you might be able to play the same note in 5 different places. So it's going to sound different in all of those places based on the tension of the string or the thickness of the string. And you need to find the place that is the playable place that also sounds closest to what you're hearing. And that was very helpful in determining the positions that he actually played the stuff versus trying to make position jumps and looking for places to play those notes. He had a very elegant way of placing the stuff so that it was easily manageable in playing positions. He didn't have a lot of stuff that he played where his hand would have to go from here to here to here, all this kind. He wasn't a crazy position shifting player in that way. He had, some tapping stuff that would move around, but most of the stuff was really comfortable positions. And that was really key to understanding that that was the way you should play guitar. Make the stuff playable, make it sit right. Even when he was playing hard stuff, it was still in compact positions that you could manage.
Sure.
And now the exact opposite of that is true in my dad's music when you're trying to learn melodies that he wrote for other instruments and apply them to the guitar. So for example, if he wrote a part that was intended for marimba, that translates to the guitar in an entirely different way. Plus he was doing things where a lot of the melodies were based on intervals of fourths. And on guitar, fourths are stacked on the strings just right underneath each other, or it's a big stretch. So if you want to get to that note, and if you start looking at things that are at a fast tempo, the stuff that's stacked, then you have a hard time picking in between the strings. And if it's wide stretches and it's a fast tempo, there's a chance that you're not going to get your finger to the right location. And it's complicated. So all that kind of stuff is so hard to play in my dad's music. But as a kid, I thought one day I want to learn all these complicated melodies. I want to be able to play that stuff because I love the sound of it. But I had to go through the whole technical approach of rock guitar playing and Van Halen and Randy Rhoads to build scalular and picking technique before I could even think of trying to figure out a way to play the hard stuff in my dad's music, which then once I was going there, I had to completely unlearn all the other stuff. I took like 2 years to recalibrate how I played guitar, different picking style, all this different fingering technique, which started to group notes on strings differently. And it was the kind of process that almost no one would undertake because I'd already been playing guitar for, I don't know, almost 30 years when I decided to do the complete overhaul.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was one of those things where it's like if you said, okay, I've learned to breathe. Now I'm going to change how I breathe. That's what I had to do with the guitar. It was a complete, like I've already been playing and I had developed a good amount of technical proficiency, but I said, okay, I have to forget all of that because I cannot play what I want to play with those techniques. Sure. I have to see it differently and I have to do it differently.
Yep.
And it took me a couple of years to learn a new way to play. And during that time, I was also putting a band together to learn to play my dad's music. So before I ever did the first year of the Zappa Plays Zappa project, I had already spent 2 years learning the music and changing how I played guitar drastically. So wow. It was like getting a lobotomy and then training for the Olympics, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a lot of craziness. But over the years, I've learned to like tearing that technical side of things down and having an ability to then take a deeper dive and look at certain things independently. So even now with having the forced time off during COVID, I haven't even played guitar hardly at all, maybe 2 weeks over the past year.
Wow.
But when I have played, what I focused on was left hand only. And I wanted to get a sound just from my left hand because really how you touch the string has a lot more tone than what you actually realize.
Absolutely.
And being able to put your finger in the right place and get that sound and have your fingers know where to go without having to do anything with your right hand actually made my right hand behave better, because my thought process was my left hand is free. My right hand doesn't have to worry about which notes I'm going to try to pick, because if I skip something with my right hand, my left hand's still going to play that note. So it started to change a lot of what my playing is. So it's something that I'm going to focus on again when I start getting a chance to play again. But it's a totally different perspective that I wish I would have started with back when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
Because it would have given me so much freedom to be expressive with just dynamic range and ability to move around and actually have accuracy.
Yep.
And independence.
Yep. It's such a brilliant time, I think, with YouTube and the like, to be able to take lessons from your favorite players. It's like, hey, I really like how this guy does this. Look up a lesson, you can see it. Now, you're very lucky that being up and close with Edward, you would have clicked onto the whole tremolo picking thing being done with the middle finger.
Yeah.
Early, yeah? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him do all that stuff. I could never do it with the accuracy from going string to string. There's a certain wrist angle that he has, and that I think is now more known to people. There's a website where there's a guy that has a thing called Cracking the Code.
I was going to bring that up.
And Cracking the Code shows you every picking style and the difference of wrist position or forearm position. And that really does make a difference when you start having a look at what makes it possible for you to get from string to string without getting stuck. And the thing about Eddie's picking style is that he did not ever set out to be a guy that would pick every single note. Sometimes he might pick 2 of 3, hammer the third with his finger, or he would just pick 1 and do legato style stuff. But he could also pick all the notes if he wanted for certain kinds of passages. But I think what was great about his playing was that he didn't have a predictable sense of where that would take place. Sometimes he'd pick a lot of notes, sometimes he would do all legato or all tapping.
Yep.
So that range and the colors and the tonality that he would get from those things, the timbre of that stuff, was great. And I think a lot of people missed out on what is great about that. You could hear it in his rhythm playing, the dynamics, and his lead playing. And a lot of what he did involved turning the volume down. And then when he wanted to be full on, he was there. But he was constantly using the volume knob to give himself different tones. And that's what a lot of people did back in the 70s. That was, you turned your amp up pretty loud, but you turned your guitar down to have a cleaner rhythm sound. And then when you wanted to go to lead, you just turned it back up. That's kind of lost on a lot of people now, because you can have presets and you can have it be totally clean and you don't have to use your guitar volume. But, I've not been a player that used my guitar volume for specifically the reason that I've just said. Sometimes it's faster to just step on a pedal or step on a preset, and you can be where you need to be and just focus on what you have to play rather than constantly fiddling with a knob and then get back to picking.
Yep.
That being said, it is nice to be able to do that when it's appropriate for the kind of playing. Like even Angus Young is that kind of guy.
Yep.
He's using his volume knob to get a tone for his rhythm sound, or when he wants to pluck or do some different things. But he wants to be full on, then he's got a little bit more sustain.
Yep.
And the guys that are old school like that, even Jimi Hendrix played that way. What you have is a much bigger dynamic range, and the whole band learns to play within that dynamic range as well. Because if he's going to turn down, you can't have everybody else bashing away, or now you can't hear it, So everybody's just kind of moving with the dynamics of all that stuff. And they just learn to play within that, which is that's just such a great thing that happens when bands really know how to play together.
I got to admit, I do ride the volume knob quite a lot, and it is great. Just that those little nuances of like, I've just got that tiny bit too much gain, or just back it off. And Dave Leslie has just dropped a comment in the chat room saying guitar volume knob equals channel switching for old guys.
Yes, that's right. That's pretty much. But Dave, we were just talking about you before we went live. I hope you're doing well. I haven't seen you in forever, but we had some really good times when we were doing some stuff in the studio and on that Van Halen tour.
Now, speaking of Van Halen, you mentioned his rhythm playing.
Yeah.
And not long after Ed passed, I got asked to guest at a Van Halen tribute show that was up in Brisbane. And just learning the songs for that, it really struck me. I mean, everyone talks about his solos, and yeah, they're fantastic, but it's the stuff he's playing when he's not soloing that is just mind-blowing. It's not, hey, I'm just going to strum an A chord or whatever now.
Right.
He's just writes parts. Everything is a part. He's not just filling in things. Yeah.
It's not like a cycle of chord progressions. The things that he plays are embellished and they change depending on his mood. So he might play the same song differently each time, and even live, he'll probably change certain fills in between things. But to be able to have a vocabulary that works that way is hard to develop. And he did that at an early age. In his early 20s, he had written probably most of his best songs that continued to appear on the subsequent albums. So a lot of the stuff that he had been working on, he was just on fire for years with so much creativity and innovation. And one of the things that's really interesting is that on the first record, he was using a guitar that didn't have a locking nut, right? He had that regular Fender tremolo on there, but that guitar almost never went out of tune. Now, that's impossible, but he found a couple of ways to make it stay in tune, and it had nothing to do with a locking tremolo. It had something to do with changing how the nut was cut and changing the bridge so that the strings, when they come through the bridge, they don't stay at the very bottom. It was altered so that they came closer to the upper saddle. Oh, cool. So he was able to have a little bit more stability there. But there's a few other things that come with that, where when he would play, there was a certain amount of vibrato bar technique stuff that he did that you would hear him do a lot. And it wasn't necessarily just because he wanted to hear that sound. Part of that was putting the guitar back in tune. There's a certain thing that he had to do to hit the vibrato bar a certain way so that he had checkpoints to hear when he would play something. So if you hear him dive bomb a low string and then come back up on a D string or a G string, he would listen for that, and then he would make adjustments by doing either a silent pull on the string, like something that would shock it back to a position that made it move at the nut or whatever, or he would actually do a wide, big bend where he'd bend multiple frets to push that string from sharp back to in pitch. And these were techniques that he learned to use, and it became part of his songwriting.
Wow.
But when you hear him do some of that stuff, he's putting the guitar back in tune.
Yep. It's become a part of his style.
Yeah. It's a crazy thing. It's like gear shifting or something, you know?
Yeah.
But you don't realize it until you say, wait a minute, how did he keep that thing in tune? You listen to tons of bootlegs of him in those early days, that guitar is almost never out of tune, and he's beating the hell out of the vibrato bar.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's certain things he did to tweak it so that the guitar would stay in better pitch, but he also had techniques that were checkpoints that were built into his playing. And to me, that's utterly fascinating and so innovative, and it's really not something that's talked about.
So speaking about him developing his own original style, at what age did you start writing your own music?
Well, right away when picked up the guitar, I would try to write my own music. But the thing that is really interesting, and I've talked about this on the podcast a few times with different people, is some players develop their own style almost instantly. They just have their thing, and that's just what they do. Other players, it takes some time for them to find out what their voice is going to be. And every guitar player always has a set of influences, and you learn to play like your heroes. Some people want to learn just to get in the ball game, just sound an overview of that sound. And some people want to get note for note. I want to get note for note and get the exact sound as close as I can, because it's like cooking. You know, you want to know what the ingredients are, because if you had some food you really liked, and you might not ever get a chance to go back to that restaurant because it was in a city you may never travel to again, you want to know how you can recreate that taste. And so for me, that's always been the fascinating part of listening to something and then trying to find a way to have similar equipment or get the same sound with entirely different equipment, but still be able to get what makes you feel that way and what it makes it sound like when you do it. So that combination with also learning songs note for note, to me, if I couldn't play something which sounded very much like I was playing note for note with whatever the thing was, I didn't feel like I was playing the song.
Yeah.
And so other people might take the approach of, you learn some of the basic chords and then you embellish and do your own thing, but you say, oh, I'm playing the song. To me, that never sounded like you were actually playing the song. If you didn't play like all the fills and the solo note for note and have the vibrato and all that stuff, that wasn't playing what Edward Van Halen played. Now, to play exactly like him, you really can't. But to get as close as you can to your own ability, that was, for me, that was kind of a lifelong passion of learning some of those things. But along the way, there were all kinds of other players that I also really liked, which I would go through a similar process. So over a period of time, I've learned to play in different styles or play similar to the style of my favorite players. But as you do that, you also learn how to take what you like from that and make it your own and create this other vocabulary for yourself. But for me, I don't feel like I really found what my voice was on the guitar until probably the most the way that was the most incongruous way, which was for me to be playing my dad's music and learning a lot of stuff note for note in his style. What I had to do was I had to end up being able to be at a place where I could play in context to his music, because he might play a 7 or 8 minute or even 10-minute guitar solo that was completely extemporaneous. He didn't have a set group of licks where it's like, oh, lick number one fast.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't have any of that kind of stuff. He would listen to the music and he would react to the music. So every time he played a solo, it was different. Now, to do that, you have to have a really big vocabulary rhythmically and melodically. You have to know musically that you can go on a tangent and decide to reharmonize whatever you're doing, and have a band that can hear that and then go with you and build that. So as I was trying to be able to get to a place where I could speak using some of the same words he might use, but then make my own sentences with some of my own words, I had to know enough of his vocabulary and what the ingredients were to then be able to play basically using guideposts. I would play some note for note parts, and then before I got to the next post that was note for note, I would have to fill in the gaps.
Sure. But
I didn't want to take a left turn and make it sound like, okay, for the first 20 seconds, it sounds like Frank Zappa. And then it suddenly sounds like Van Halen or Brian May or whatever. It's how do I stay in the style of Frank Zappa, but also make it my own? And that's at that point where I started to develop a vocabulary of my own with a bunch of strategies on how to build melodic ideas. And that was when things really changed for me. But that was only maybe 10 10 years ago or so,
Really?
where that stuff really started to kick in. And I had already been playing for 30 years
Yep.
or whatever,
Yep.
you know? So, but I mean, I had always been pretty technically proficient, and I could play rock music and all kinds of things. And I could play hard stuff on the guitar. And I probably had some of my own sounds even before what I'm talking about. But to really be able to be improvisational and create in the moment, it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I felt like I was able to do that with an ability to actually continually come up with new things. I still would repeat some things, but I had a much broader range where I could just explore, and things would happen that would never happen again. And that's what I loved about my dad's style of playing, is he would play something and the drummer would go with him, or vice versa. And the stuff that would happen, you would never hear it again. It couldn't be duplicated ever, because it's just a completely live thing. So stuff like that was what he loved. He loved to be able to be in the moment and do that, and then hear it and realize it could never be done again.
Wow.
And so that was the goal, was to try to get somewhere close to that.
Yeah. It's really flying on the seat of your pants kind of stuff in it, the whole improvisational thing. I had Frank Gambale on a few weeks back for a bit of a chat, and he was saying about recording live with Chick Corea, and there was one solo, and he said, I nailed it. It was just one note. He's like, man, can we go back and do that again? He goes, no, it's all improvised. And he goes, but that wrong note. And he said, Chick just said to him, well, why did you play that note? And like to be thrown in the deep end like that and not given a second chance. And so I'm guessing your dad was kind of like that too, huh?
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of different ways that guitar players can get from one place to another. And the thought process for some is very linear. So a guy like Frank Gambale, who is an amazing player, he is able to know that when he starts, he eventually wants to target this chord tone on this chord. He's going to get to a certain place, and he's going to weave a way, contour to get to his target. But he already knows what that's going to sound like. He already knows what the pitch of that note with that chord is going to sound like. Now, there might be, let's say, 20% of the best guitar players in the world who have that ability, who think like that. Then you maybe have another 20% that are kind of able to do that, but they are hearing things happen as they happen, and they're reacting to it, and it's, ooh, hey, here's a surprise, here's a cool thing. But then you have other people that have no idea, and they're playing and they're hearing it as they're playing, and they're trying to get somewhere. They don't know what chord tone or what note is going to be the exact right one to make you have a certain feeling.
Sure.
But sometimes they'll stumble on it, and that will be the goosebumps kind of thing. That will be like, okay, this is the reason I play guitar.
Yeah.
And you're waiting to catch another one of those waves where something like that happens. So I think the majority of guitar players who are not skilled or know a lot about theory are hearing themselves play as they're playing, and they don't have the ability to predict what everything's going to sound like. So that's why a lot of their playing becomes so stuck in, here's my licks. I have what's comfortable. I can use this because it's not going to put me in a place where I suddenly play something that I really don't like. Now, being on the other side of that is, if you take the chance and you play something that you really don't like and it's live, it is what it is. But if you take the chance and you play something you really do like and you could never do it again, then that's like, whoa, like the biggest, the greatest moment ever. So it's that thing of like, how much risk reward can you tolerate?
Yeah.
And the guys that really know what everything is, it's almost uninteresting at a certain point because it's too predictable. They know this note's going to sound great. They can play something perfectly all the way through every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
At a certain point, you're like, that's amazing. But I want to hear something where it's like, I feel like, you're on a windy road and you might go over the cliff because you can barely handle the car. but when you land on your feet, you're like, yes, you know. So that's the kind of thing. That's what I feel like was in a lot of Edward Van Halen's playing. And there's a lot of different styles of music, and there are a lot of people that achieve that thing that I'm talking about in different styles. But for me, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle of all that. I've learned enough of the theory behind it all to have some sense of the linear part of it, but it's too much for me to think about. So I revert to the innate sense of I'm playing, I'm hearing it. I just heard the bass player play a line. Maybe I should try to answer him. Oh, I just heard the drummer play a fill. Maybe I should pick up on that rhythm. And when I can get in that frame of mind, when I can listen to what everybody else is doing and react to it, I play much more interesting music to me than if I'm just in the driver's seat and I'm playing and I feel like everybody's trying to follow me. But that's the hardest thing, is you have to listen. So I have a friend of mine named Tim Miller, who's a great guitarist, and he showed me that he used to just put a piece of paper down by his pedal board. It just said, listen. So I took it a step further, and I just put a big piece of tape that was across my pedal board, like right next to all the buttons, that just says, listen. And even though I'm staring at that, I might listen only 5% of the time. I have to force myself to look at that and remember, oh, that's what I need to do. And that is part of playing with people all the time and having the ability to know what happens when you have the reaction. Because you can't learn that by sitting in your bedroom and just playing to backing tracks.
You know, one of the best things I ever learned, and it's fairly recent. I was perusing the TrueFire site, and I believe you've got a few videos teaching on TrueFire. Yeah. And I always forget, was it Robin Ford or Larry Carlton? Blues Motifs was the name of the video, and he talks about exactly that, listening to everyone in the band and the drummer, keyboard player, and somebody might play a cool little lick, and you go, thank you, I'm going to run with that, and making little motifs out of it and having that musical conversation. It's something that these guys that just play their rehearsed licks don't get. And I remember the first time I watched that video and played a show with a friend of mine who I'd been playing with for 30 years. The first time I tried that trick, I went to take a solo. He stopped playing his bass, threw his hands in the air, and just went, fuck, listen to that. What was that? And I'm like, oh, okay. He's heard me play for 30 years. And for me to take that little idea of listening and then taking a motif and running with it, someone who knows my playing that well, made them just go, whoa, what was that? So cool.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that you can't know what it feels like until you have played with musicians that can stir the pot with you at the same time and understand, okay, you just did that. Let me pick up on that. And not like to a way where, like, if you had a conversation and everybody was talking at the same volume and they're all talking at the same time, that's a cacophony, and no one can understand. You have to leave spaces, and you have to be able to have dynamics, and it has to be somewhat unpredictable in the flow of the thing. But the hardest thing for guitar players, and I would say for me in particular, is to leave enough space. Because when you're playing, you're typically playing a lot of 8th notes or 16th notes, and that's how you're keeping time. A lot, guitar players, you know? So if you force yourself to stop, then you definitely have to be listening, because you're not rhythmically attached to a motion that's keeping time. I mean, yes, you can tap your foot and stuff, but the thing is, I think a lot of times guitar players also might have a tone that they're using that might be uncontrollable. If they stop playing, it might feed back, or it might be something. So they think, oh, I got to keep playing because I don't want this to happen. But my dad is kind of like the opposite of that. He might have a tone that would feed back, and he wouldn't care if it howled a little bit for a second. He would put a break in. There was one solo he did one time where he took these incredibly long pauses. I mean, excruciatingly long pauses. And I was like, there must be something technically wrong, like he's trying to fix his amp or something. But he was listening for something to develop that made him want to enter the conversation. And when he did, it was so kick-ass that it was like, all this setup time for this, but then he would leave another space, and you were just waiting to see what would happen. And it was so interesting to see that he was able to leave such holes but everything worked because the rhythm section was so good that they're doing stuff that you want to hear anyway, so that's the real struggle. Is there's lots of viable ways to play guitar and do solos. You can totally write a solo and perform it note for note, play it absolutely perfect, and it could be exactly what's needed for that song. And it might be the coolest thing ever. But if you're trying to do something that is just completely in the moment, anything can go wrong. I mean, and if it does, so be it. But if you do something that you pull off where everybody has just played the coolest thing and you can never get that exact phrasing again, and there's all this interplay and all these things, that's the part where it just kind of lives on. And every time you listen to it, you get excited about that thing, as opposed to hearing the perfect thing, which at a certain point you go, okay, I've heard it. I know it. You tune out, so there's a fine line there. Like, I think certain players have the ability to write captivating things and perform it note for note, and it's cool. But again, at a certain point, you've heard it enough that it doesn't have that inner life in it, And so trying to make a combination of both, where maybe you have a theme, but then you have some improv stuff that happens, and then maybe you go back to a theme at the end, that's another way of doing it. And that's kind of the way that I try to build the guideposts in some of the live solos. And there's going to be nights when I will feel like everything I played is terrible, but at least I was trying.
Yeah.
I didn't go up there and just play my, lick one fast, lick one slow, whatever bag of tricks. But the weird thing too is that on a night when I thought I might have played great, and I go and I listen to it, it's not good. It's like there's something about it that's almost too predictable or too executed. And then on a night when I thought, I just kind of that one just kind of got by me tonight, I listen back and it's actually better than any of the stuff. So your own perception, even in the moment, can be totally off. And I found that almost every musician suffers from the same thing.
Absolutely.
Is you might have a memory of executing one thing really well and go, that's going to be good. I can't wait to hear that. Then you might listen and go, you know what? I might have played that part right, but somebody over here fucked up. And this thing, so like you weren't even listening to what was happening around you. You just listened to you.
Yeah.
And when you finally start being able to get that focus, you start enjoying other things about the music, the songwriting, the things that other people are doing. Because the less, like even in my in-ear mix, my guitar is lower than most of the other instruments. And I do it on purpose so that I have to pay more attention to whatever else is happening. But if I have my guitar too loud, I'll only focus on what I'm doing.
Sure.
And I can't quite get into the zone of the other stuff.
Yep. So have you been wearing in-ears for a while?
Yeah, probably since 2008 or 9.
Yeah. And do you get a bit of extra ambience thrown onto your own mix, or are you just hearing directly?
We have mics that are staged left and right that are just kind of up. We don't have anything from the front of house way back because that reflection is too far off. There's too much delay with that.
Yep.
But you want to be able to have just the touch of, you want to be able to hear an audience reaction to something, because otherwise you're in a vacuum. If you're playing and you don't hear anything, any reaction, you might as well be doing a puppet show.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to jump back just a little bit. You were talking about learning things note for note and not feeling right unless you absolutely nail it. Now, I got to say, just poking around on YouTube, I saw a video of you playing Eruption, and that's the closest I've seen anybody play it. Now, I actually took the time myself, not going through transcriptions because I find a lot of transcriptions are wrong, but I put it into some software and I slowed it down to 10%, to just try and
Right.
work it all out myself. And those things you were talking about, where is he playing that? What position? You know, and just listening for the tone, going, okay, I can hear that open string in there, and just picking these little
Yep.
things that would get past most people. Did you pick his brains, or did you take the time to really learn that
It
yourself?
was years of listening to it because there's times when I've listened where I've learned it and thought, okay, I think I got this, and then I'll record myself playing it and go, nope, that's not right, and then I'll listen back and be like, how come I didn't hear this part before? I've listened to this hundreds of times, and then suddenly something will reveal itself, and you go, oh, and but I've had that happen maybe 10 or 12 or 15 times with that over the years, where the next time I go back, something else will pop out, and I think, okay, here's a little ism, a little thing that I need to work on. And I never got it to where I could play along with the track and play absolutely perfectly in time and play everything exactly with his phrasing. I got in the ballpark pretty well, but when I had to play it live, you also have the pressure of pulling it off. So I don't know. There's one or two versions out there where I play it decent, but to really play it as he played it, like if I was to sit down next week and say, okay, I'm going to learn this again, I know I would hear a lot of stuff totally different.
Yep.
And a lot of it would come from the fact that he used such a thin pick at that time.
So
And
is
to
that
get
true?
a
He
lot
really
of-
used a thin pick?
Yeah.
Yep. I thought maybe he was just throwing that out there to throw people off, because it doesn't sound like
he
it.
really did, because when he came over that night, he gave me some of his picks, and they were super thin. Like you do a pick slide on it and you rip it in half. So I still have a handful of those picks from that night when he came over and gave me those picks.
Yep.
But the thing about that kind of pick, what you find when you're playing with a really thin pick is obviously you don't have to hit the string very hard. And he played really light strings. I mean, he played like 9 through 38,
Yeah.
I think was what he had back in the day. And so to play chords in tune, you don't have to hit the strings hard. He had a great tone. It didn't matter. He didn't have to hit any harder. But the thing about it is they really articulate all of like any kind of arpeggio, or when you really want to dig into a high string, anytime you're playing on that stuff, it starts getting like tiny little serrated edges. And that stuff adds like this extra harmonic or this extra thing that happens when you scrape across a string, or it sounds like he's really digging in, but it's the pick has like some like beat up edges.
Wow.
That are making that just kind of come out a little bit. And even like the Edge from U2 purposely damages his picks to get that kind of stuff to make the chimier sounds while he's playing. So it's these little tiny details, stuff like that will actually make a difference in being able to execute some of the notes and get some of the feel on that stuff. And I've recently, when I have played, I have started playing with this grip just to see like what happens when I try to adapt that to some other things that I do. Because a long time ago, I tried playing that way. It just was never that comfortable. When I originally started playing, I had more of the Randy Rhoads thing where these fingers would be completely flexed and tense. And Warren DeMartini had that too. It was like the pinky was always out. But Ed was always much more loose, and that different kind of shape there. So over time, my picking style changed so drastically. I learned a lot of stuff actually from Frank Gambale's videos, and I learned a lot of his sweep picking techniques. But now lately, I've been trying to use the Van Halen grip and some left hand stuff, and incorporating hammer-on from nowhere with picking, and it's like becoming a different kind of sound, but I can still go back to the other stuff anytime I need it.
Yep.
I'm just looking at what are the different dynamic ranges, what are the different textures that I can get, and different picks work better for different style of playing. But if I really want to get that kind of Van Halen sound, that thin pick is really the ticket.
It's funny you say about the serrated edges. I was a Brian May impersonator for a while, playing at a touring Queen show.
Yep.
I have one of his picks, which is actually a coin right there. Is it going to focus? There it is.
Yep.
You cannot get his sound unless you're using a coin. And luckily, the Australian 5-cent piece is as close as you can get to an old sixpence. And that edge, when you listen closely, you hear that chirping, metal on metal. It's got a little dunk, dunk at the start of it. But just that serrated edge, like you say, it just gives it something. People would say to me, are you breaking a hell of a lot of strings because you're using a coin? I'm like, no, never play them. And it kind of just, it glides across the strings, but that serrated edge excites the energy in the string. It's an amazing thing.
But it's also round at the same time. So there's something about that gives you, like even with a normal pick, if you use the rounded edge, it's a smoother sound than the tip of the pick. You'll find that anytime you even metal pick or whatever, if you have the edge versus the rounded side, it does alter the contact and what happens with how it reacts to the string. But that is, I find, like a really rounded edge makes it very difficult to do a lot of alternate picking or fast stuff.
Yep.
But what it's great for is making you play with really specific phrasing, where the pick actually is part of the sound in a dramatic way. So if you listen to like Dragon Attack on the Game record, and he's scraping across strings and then bending, and he's got that the tone where it's the octave is coming through in that out of phase setting on his. I mean, Dragon Attack is probably one of the greatest rock guitar recordings of all time. You know,
I'm gonna have to check that out.
The tone that's on there is incredible, and it's his heaviest sound on anything to me, that Brian May sound. But that's where you really hear what the pick is really doing as he scrapes into stuff, and he's playing some really cool rock pentatonic licks. They're a little bit quick, but they're never super fast. He was never like a really super fast player, but always melodic. But the tone, that little bit of the articulation, is a huge part of why his sound is so memorable. It's because the way he hits the strings and gets into those notes, there's so much personality there versus just standard regular picking and you know, like the more you get into real standard mechanics and trying to make everything as good as you can, you lose a lot of the personality of all that stuff that is the troublemaker stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a trade-off.
Dweezil, I wanted to ask you about the Hendrix Strat that you've got, and I totally forgot about this. As I told you before we went live, I don't do any research. I just have a chat with people. And I'll be back in like 1 second. I need to show you something.
Okay.
You totally inspired this guitar of mine. I remember seeing a picture of your burnt Strat. So I took this black Strat and I put lighter fluid on it and I set it on fire, and everybody comments on just the look of this, and it's a great sounding Strat.
Did it sound better after you burned it?
What's that? Did it sound better?
Did it sound better after you burned it?
I can't really say I did an A/B test to tell you if that had any effect on it. But, and I'm going to dob my friend Dave Leslie in, when he came to your house and you guys weren't looking, he licked it.
Nice.
He licked it. I totally forgot about that story, but he told me that many years ago, that he was like, oh, when I was looking, I was like, I need to get some of that DNA.
That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, so that like sat around at your place for a long time, didn't it? Unused?
So my dad played it a lot, and then it disappeared for a little while, and he didn't know where it was. And there used to be a staircase that was at the street level that went up to the next level where the studio was. And behind that staircase, one day I just decided to look back behind there and just to see what was back there. And the Hendrix guitar was in pieces. The neck was off, the pickguard was off, and the body, and it was just sitting there, not even in a case, just dust all around it. I have no idea why it was there, how long it had been there like that, what was the purpose for leaving it there, or who had done that. But I found it, and it was in pretty bad condition. So what I did was this was in 1991 that I found it there. And my dad had been playing it from about 77 to about 82, and then it kind of disappeared. So in 1991, I found it behind that staircase, and I had a friend that was working at Fender at the time, Jay Black, who was a master builder. I had him build a neck that was a traditional Fender neck, but I made it a flipped headstock, and we put a new pickguard on the guitar that would have been, it was just like a tortoiseshell style pickguard and some standard pickups. Rather than all of the electronics that were in the guitar, I kind of made it back to a stock guitar that was sort of a nod to Jimmy, but also my dad really liked at that point just straight single coil pickups in a Strat. So I just made it almost a stock guitar, and I gave it to him on his birthday as a surprise. But at that time, he was so ill, he couldn't play it. He couldn't enjoy it. So he said, that's so cool that you did this, but why don't you have the guitar? And so that's how it ended up becoming my guitar. But I've since replicated the way it was when he was on the cover of Guitar Player magazine in 1977, which had a rosewood neck on it, and it had this really weird, it seemed like it was like a piece of a pickguard that was cut out almost in a shark fin shape.
Oh, yeah.
That was underneath the tuning peg, underneath the string tree. But then he had this metal, it looked like it was a mirror pickguard, but it was really a silver shiny metal pickguard, and it had all these knobs for extra electronics and switches and things. So I recreated the guitar to look exactly as it was on that magazine cover, and that's the way I left it. But there's been various different ways I've had it over the years.
Wow. And was it a good sounding guitar?
It's an incredible sounding guitar.
Yeah.
It definitely has a personality all of its own. I mean, the only thing that was left of the Hendrix era is the body itself.
Yep.
But what's cool is when you look at it, you can see that there were different strap lock holes or strap, to put this, because he had to flip the guitar upside down, he had to put a new pin to put the strap on so he could play it the way. So when you see that little detail on there, that's one of those things. Like if you're a guitar player, like that is the hair on the arms kind of thing, because you're like, oh, this is so cool that this, at some point he burned the guitar. It was probably, to my knowledge, it was burned in London at the Astoria, and then it was brought over to the U.S. within the rest of his stuff because they were playing a show at the Miami Pop Festival. My dad played at the same festival, and that's when my dad got the guitar. It was just kind of like, hey, Jimmy burned this guitar, you want it? And it was like, yeah, okay.
Little piece of history right there, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, you're one of the first guys I knew of out there that ditched the tube amps and went with the Axe effects. How long?
Yeah.
You still Axe effectsing?
When I play live shows, I have been using the Axe effects for pretty much everything, and it's different versions. So there's the Axe effects rack unit, and then there's also different like floor units where it's all everything built in. The unit has the pedals and the volume pedal and everything. So ultimately, the switch wasn't a hard switch for me because I had built a rig prior to that I was using multiple amps and 2 refrigerator-sized racks filled with stuff. to try to recreate all the different eras of my dad's music. And, considering that his own guitar rig in 1976, he built this thing, which he spent $35,000 in 1976 money, which was like $300,000 in, modern money, to build a guitar rig. And he had all these custom things made that had never been made before, including a switcher where you could have presets and, lighted things, and you could name the thing and you can see what it was. And all the pedals, there was like a volume pedal and a wah pedal built into this switching system. But it had, things like an Eventide 910 harmonizer. It had two Dynaflangers in it. It had Marshall time modulator in it. And it had all of these different studio effects, but he was playing through 3 different amps and 2 DIs. So it was split into 5 channels. And this was this crazy setup that he had, but it produced the most amazing 3-dimensional sounds.
Wow.
And he could blend these different things. Now, in a modern situation, you have a lot of things you have to do to make that happen. Multiple amps, multiple cabinets, all this gear, over 200 cables to connect. And that stuff was being carted around, and almost every night something wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Because it had rattled around in the truck, something had come loose, so I was constantly having problems with the rig. But with the Axe effects, most of the effects that were in that rig, I could easily recreate, just in terms of whether it's compression, EQ, reverb, delays, all that kind of stuff. You can have that be whatever you want. The amp tones, I was able to get very specific with, and I could add in the DI, and I could blend these, and I could have different presets that would be set up for different guitars. So I wouldn't have to worry if I change guitar from an SG to a Strat that now the gain structure is all wrong. I would have this flexibility to have it set for specific guitars, for specific songs. Cool. And then I'd have the ability to map this stuff out and go ahead and make set lists. And if I wanted to move songs around, I could move these sounds, and I could have all this flexibility that I could never have with the other version. And I didn't really have a trade-off in terms of the audio at the end of the day. If you listen to the recordings or the tapes of any of the stuff, there were much more inconsistencies with the analog rig than there was with the digital rig.
Yeah, right.
But I went, really kind of over the top with my programming and all of the things. I didn't just use whatever the stock presets were. So I was able to take a very deep dive on that unit and have done ever since. So I really love the sound of it and the things that I can do with it. But as I'm building a studio at home, I also now have the ability to use the amps that I've always loved. And I have a switching system that will help me, go from one to another, change speaker cabinets, and you can have instant changes. So when you're recording, you can have whatever. You can use the Axe effects, or you can use amps, or you could use both.
Cool.
So I have really the most flexibility I've ever had, or I will have in the coming weeks when the studio finally starts to come online. But it's great. I mean, I love amplifiers, but when you talk about having to recreate the sounds of Frank Zappa, the Axe effects is way easier to use on a consistent basis. If I was only having to get certain sounds, like an AC/DC kind of sound, I might be much happier just plugging straight into an amp, but it just really depends. And I love the technology side of it, but having the best of both worlds in the recording studio is going to be where I'll have the most fun over the next few years.
Cool. Well, I've been keeping one eye on the chat room there, and there was a question there from PAL Guitars asking, "Do you miss tube amps?" I think you just answered that very
well.
In a very
one of the
broad
things
way.
I'm doing with the podcast is, at a certain point, there's an episode where we're going to do a real strong scientific breakdown of the so-called brown sound. Now, it's not to my version of doing this is I want to be able to make this sound, but it doesn't mean that you have to use only the gear that Eddie Van Halen used, because there are different ways to make that sound. I can make a sound in the fractal that can sound almost identical to any of the Van Halen records and not use a single amp. You could A/B it, and you'd be hard pressed to tell what's what. Now, that being said, there's also things you could do with other styles of amplifiers and different pedals and different things, or EQ or different speakers, and you can get the sound. So my goal is to make a really fun episode where we really explore all the different ways you can get some of these different sounds. And that's where we're going to show off certain amps. There's a couple of amps that I have that really just out of the box nail the sound.
Yep.
There's one, a guy just recently made, a guy named Brian Karstens. He makes an amp called the Grace amp, which actually is Billy Corgan's signature amp.
Okay.
And you wouldn't think that it would be what it is. You can get all these Van Halen sounds with this thing. It's an incredible amp, and it cleans up brilliantly. But Billy Corgan doesn't have a sound that sounds like Van Halen at all.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But it's his signature amp, yet you can get all these Van Halen sounds straight out of the gate with this thing.
Yeah.
But I have a couple of amps that John Suhr made that are instant. It's already, Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2, straight out of the box. Don't have to do anything to it.
Yep.
But the one cabinet that I have that Brian Karstens made also has 2 JBL style speakers on the top and 2 Celestions on the bottom, which is what Ed used on the first album. He had 2 different kind of speakers in his one main cabinet.
Okay.
And that helps a lot to create the sizzle and the girth and all that stuff. So the cabinet makes a big difference with all the amps I just mentioned.
Uh-huh. Cool. I did that recently with a couple of Marshall boxes I had here, where one was the older style 1960A, and then there was another one which had 1960 AV, I think they call it, with vintage 30s, and I did a bit of let's put 2 of each in each cabinet, and just like you said, I get the sizzle from the vintage 30s, and then the others, what are they, H75s, whatever they're called. That gets the girth in there, and it's a great combination. So, mixing and matching. Now, you mentioned that you've got a studio you're building at home, and that's almost up and going. I'm struggling to remember the name of your dad's studio. Something Utility Muffin
Research Kitchen.
That's it.
Yes, the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen, which now Lady Gaga owns the house and has that studio. I don't know if she's keeping that name. She might call it something different at this point. But
okay. So I was going to ask whether you still had that house or not, but Gaga was in there. Now, is it true? Again, I think I'm trying to recall Dave Leslie telling me many years ago that the access into that was like a submarine.
There was one area where you could access the studio. So from the kitchen level, you could walk out a side door, and the structure that was attached to that part of the house was this giant shell, which had the studio in it, which had a very high ceiling. And on top of the studio, we actually had a play deck, which had a basketball court, and we would ride our bikes up there when we were kids. But so the whole structure was a really tall structure that was built into the back of this, basically a mountain, because the house next to us had a driveway, a very steep driveway. So they excavated all this ground at street level, and when you got all the way back to the excavated part, it was up maybe 55, 60 feet up.
Wow.
So it was a big wedge that they had scooped out of this mountain and built this studio structure in. So the top where the kitchen door was, and you walked out onto this little porch, there was a submarine door, like a hatch door, that had all these levers that you had to undo, and then you could pull it open, and you could go in. There was a little office there, and then you could walk down the stairs into the tracking room of the studio. So it was a unique and oddball thing. But if you were in the kitchen and you wanted a quick way to get right back into the studio, you had to go through the submarine door, and you kind of had to crouch down and get in there.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And I imagine that'd be pretty soundproof too, huh?
Oh, that whole structure was totally soundproof. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Dweezil, I want to ask you about your podcast, but before I do that, I just want to let the folks in the chat room, I just want to say to them, if you have any questions for Dweezil, I know there's a couple already, drop them now and I can come back to those and ask you specifically from some of the viewers. But while people are doing that, I just wanted to ask you about your Running with the Dweezil podcast.
Yeah, it's a podcast that is about Van Halen, but it's an homage in many ways, because what I learned from his music and from being friends with him and seeing him play and all that stuff, there's a lot of stories that I can relate to people, but there's so many guitar players who've had their own brushes with Edward Van Halen, whether it's just with his music or having met him, or played with him or done different things where their paths have crossed. So the stories that you'll hear on Running with the Dweezil are really in-depth stories that all also relate to each album and going song by song and talking about the song and breaking it down and the parts that had the biggest impact for each of the guitar players who are sharing their stories. So we have got it sectioned out you can buy the podcast in bundles. So the early years is the classic Van Halen, the first 6 albums. And there's a few bonus episodes in that series as well. Overall, there's 30 episodes total, and we're still in production. We haven't done all 30 episodes yet. But the first season, which is called The Early Years, that's done. Next week is the premiere of Right Here, Right Now, which is the Sammy Hagar era, and then the Van Halen 3 with Gary Cherone period, which will also have some bonus episodes that go with that. So that season starts next week. But we also have a bundle that's called the 5150 bundle, which gives you access to both seasons. So you have your choice of what your interest level is. You can buy an independent season, just the early years, or just Right Here, Right Now, or you could buy the 5150 bundle, which gives you every single episode plus access to special online chats and other features. But the main thing is you could also, if you wanted to, you could buy just an episode at a time or just the ones that you like, and they're $2.99 for each episode, So it just depends. If you like a certain guest or you want to check out Nuno Bettencourt or Steve Vai or Billy Corgan or whoever it is that you want to check out, you can go a la carte and buy individual episodes. Or you can save money and buy the whole thing and get all the episodes with the 5150 bundle, which is $51.50. And we also are donating to Edward Van Halen's favorite charities, which one is Mr. Holland's Opus, which donates instruments to schools and kids that don't have access to instruments. And then the other one was also Van Halen used to do food drives on some of their tours. So we are donating to Feeding America. So it's a lot of work that goes into putting these things together. It's highly personalized. There's a lot of post-production elements with how the music gets edited and incorporated. So it's little audio documentaries, little audio movies that bring this stuff to life. It's not just, let's have a chat. This is how the chat went, and there you go.
Yep.
There's more to these episodes. So it's a fun thing. We're doing some more. The next episode is going to be with Mark Lettieri, who's from Snarky Puppy, and we're talking about the 5150 album. And then after that is James Valentine from Maroon 5, and we talk about the OU812 record. And then Joe Satriani talks about the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge record. So it's the first few weeks of that one are filled with a lot of really cool information and fun stories.
Well, I think I'm going to have to get that, mate, and check it out. That's very appealing.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
there's a
it's a
guy that's from Australia that he has been somebody. What we also have is a community of people that get together and talk about all the stuff. It's all on dweezilzappa.com on my website. That's where you find the podcast. But Simon Hosford, who is an Australian player who probably most of your people who listen know Simon's playing, but he did a really great Van Halen tribute show where they played the entire first album song by song, and he played the stuff pretty much note for note. Did a really great job, and he's been part of the community. And we have like community members who've made their own video testimonials talking about how much this podcast means to them and how much they enjoy it and how thankful they are that it exists in the way that it does, because it's brought people together to be able to hear the music with different perspectives, things they never thought they'd hear about, from personal stories or just the details about recording. I've had a chance to talk to Don Landy and ask him questions about, the early albums and what did he do when he recorded this. And, I'm able to share some things that are mysterious things that we didn't know about, so
yeah.
it's fun to bring this stuff out there for people.
That's awesome. Like the real behind the people who knew him and were there, not just speculating, but people that actually knew. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the comments here, and there is one from Damon Michael. Dweezil, what is your favorite Randy Rhoads solo? Jumping from EVH to Randy Rhoads.
Okay, well, there's a lot of them, but obviously he's had some real standout ones in some of the more well-known songs like "Flying High Again" or "Diary of a Madman," where he's got some pretty cool phrases that he puts in there. But "Crazy Train," all those ones are great. But the stuff that he did, and obviously Mr. Crowley, one of his most well-known. But he really composed a lot of those solos and would triple track the stuff. So the stuff that sounds like it wasn't as composed kind of over time has really stood out to me. Like the SATO solo is a one that sounds like he just kind of went for it. And I love that one. But I also love the end solo to the song "Tonight," the one that fades out. That one's killer. But there's one track, and it was on a picture disc that I had, and I'm spacing on the name because it's an unreleased song that never came out on any album. It just was, you can find it, but I don't remember the name of it right now. Somebody probably already knows what I'm talking about. But that solo is for sure just an improvised solo because it's a live take of this track, and that one's really good too. But I love all of his textures and things that he did songwriting wise. The way his counterpoint and the little pieces, the way he would put stuff together, was a big influence on me. In a way, it reminded me of my dad's music just because of orchestration and the way that he fit all these parts together, but only just guitar. My dad's music had a lot of different instruments, and they all fit together, but there's so many little bits and pieces that Randy put into his playing that I love. And I learned a lot just about arranging and orchestration from listening to those records.
Cool. I got another question here from RJ Ronquillo. I think I'm saying that right, RJ. RJ is a great guitar player from Nashville, great YouTuber. Does Dweezil still have that Madonna guitar?
I do, yes.
Yeah?
I have it. It hasn't been played in a very long time, so I was thinking about, once my studio is kind of up and running, I'll do a little studio tour and a playthrough of some of the guitars that are just kind of haven't been out of their cases in a while.
Cool. Now there's a super chat here from Planet Solanki. Thank you for that, Planet Solanki. I don't quite understand the question, but it says, do I remember correctly, Dweezil and Taylor Dane tell me something good on his game show?
Okay, so I had
sense?
a show that was on the USA Network called Happy Hour, and it was a show where you had female celebrities and male celebrities, and they would have to play sort of party games, and they had to all do some karaoke singing. And it was a really fun show. It was kind of ahead of its time. But Taylor Dane came and sang on that. I mean, we had Shaka Khan on there. We had different people. It was actors and musicians, and there was a whole team of dancers. The Pussycat Dolls were the dancers. So it was a fun show, but I don't know anything beyond what that person's referencing. But yes, it happened.
Cool. Now, we were talking about Ed before, and I was just thinking about how lucky you were to have him as a bit of a mentor hanging around when you were a young fella. Do you know Wolfgang?
I don't know him well. I met him a few times when he was much younger. I'd love to have him as a guest on the podcast at some point, when he has a moment to think about doing it. But he, I think, is doing an incredible job in the position that he's in, because with modern social media, you have all these armchair critics and all these people that do things that, if they were face to face with you, they wouldn't have the ability to be as off-putting and sometimes just flat out cruel that people are to some people, online.
Yep.
So there's things that have happened over time where people have said things that were not the nicest stuff. And it happens to anybody who's a public figure. But I think that Wolfgang has learned how to, have the inner strength to do what he wants to do, the way that he wants to do it. He has the support from the people that he really knows and trusts and cares about. And he's able to just say, you know what, I'm just doing what I do. If you don't like it, you don't have to, and not have it be so, have somebody have the power to affect him emotionally. Because there's been people that have said things that, again, were not the nicest stuff. I have stuff said about me all the time too. But being in a similar position of having a well-known musician as a father and a great guitar player, and then having to be pitted against them as, oh, which one's better, or this, that, or the other, you're in a no-win situation. So to me, I never cared about it when it was stuff related to me, because, I would just say, whatever I do, I'm just going to let the music speak for itself.
Yeah.
Because people are going to make up their own minds and say whatever they're going to say. And I think, what he's done, the music he's created, and his ability is showing the music is speaking for itself. And he's got a good sense of humor, and he's doing a great job with how he's presenting that stuff. And I know that at a certain point down the road, he'll get around to doing something amazing with his father's catalog, whatever he chooses to do. And whether it's with Alex and the other guys or whatever, they'll do something that Van Halen fans are sure to love. But I'm sure he's not in a rush to have to do that, because it's emotionally difficult.
I think he surprised a lot of people when he did release the first song, The Distance, and then everything since then. I myself was of the mindset of, oh yeah, Eddie's been saying how talented his son is. Everyone's kid's talented, Yeah. And when I heard it, I was like, holy crap, this guy can sing, he can play, he can write a good song. And I just saw it announced that he's going to be opening for Guns N' Roses on the big tour that they're doing, planning.
Tour.
So yeah, hats off to the guy. He can actually really play and is super talented.
Yeah, for sure. And the crazy thing is, there's a video that I'm sure many people have seen where he plays the finger tapping part of Eruption, and nobody has ever played it as close to Ed as Wolfgang, just in terms of like the actual DNA phrasing, that just the way that he moves through it, it just sounds just like his dad.
Wow. There's a question here from Jamie F. He's giving you a bit of a shout out first, but then he says, your upbringing, career, and connections are epic. Any chance we may see an autobiography at some stage? Would be an amazing read.
You know, the thing is, it's funny. Only in the last couple years have I been much of an autobiography reader. I really never got into it too much, but during COVID, I pretty much started reading a lot of them. And I never thought about doing one of my own because I'm like, who wants to hear that? You know, like I'm not like my dad was a perfect example. Somebody towards the end of his life said, "How would you like to be remembered?" And he said, "I wouldn't." So, you
Really?
know, but he had made a book before. He made the Real Frank Zappa book, which is an incredible book, but it's not specifically an autobiography. But it's a really fun read, and there's a lot of cool stuff in it. But for me, I never really thought about it for a book. But lately, a lot of people have been saying, "Hey, you got some good stories. You should probably think about it." So maybe, but it's never been like you know. To me, it's kind of like what my dad said. Like, do you want to be remembered? He said, I wouldn't. But he was saying that people who want to be remembered are people like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon and stuff like that, where you want to have the library or you want to have the thing or you want to be like, well, this is the mark I made. It's like, isn't just doing what you do good enough? Like it doesn't, you know, so I just have never thought about it in those terms, but if there's some kind of an interest, then maybe I'll think about it because you know I just to me it's great memories and it's things, but it's not like I go, oh hey, people are gonna love this.
Yeah. You know, it's just the way you know life growing up with a dad that is Frank Zappa. I'm
Yeah.
sure things that just seem like everyday occurrences to you, to other people would just be no way, you know.
Well, maybe, you know, not everything was always like some kind of amazing jaw-dropping experience, but I've had a few where it's like it's not lost on me that I got to do cool things with some cool musicians and have opportunities to do, you know, fun and interesting things in various different versions of entertainment. But yeah, I'll think about it.
Yeah, yeah. Just from my opening question to you of you know, what started the love affair with the electric guitar, and then you've launched into having Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen and your father showing you the ropes. You know, to most people, I do recall somebody asking me on my Facebook page when I announced that you were going to be coming on, asking that question of, did you ever get to sit down with Steve Vai and Frank and play some guitar? And you've taken that
Yeah.
one step further with your opening remarks there about having EVH there as well. So
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting because over the years, I've played with a lot of the most influential players that had the biggest influence on me. And so when it comes to Van Halen, one of the most interesting things that I had was the real role reversal, where I used to go to his shows and go visit him backstage and be so excited just to have seen the show and all this stuff. And but I did a show where I opened for Jeff Beck, and it was in 2010, and we played at a place called the Nokia Center in Los Angeles. And Edward came to my show. He came to the sound check, and he stuck around for the show. And then, you know, we talked before the show and after the show. But the thing that was different there was when we were backstage, he was like, hey, how are you playing that part? That part looks crazy on the guitar. And I'm showing him how I'm playing St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, which is really impossibly difficult to play on the guitar. And then he's looking at it going, there's no way that I could play that. You know, so it was like the total role reversal kind of thing in that moment. And it was just like a mind-blowing thing because it's like Jedi mind trick or something. You know, it's like, oh, you know, like it's just totally, you know, it flip-flopped for that moment, you know. And it was a really fun experience to have that because I would have never have thought that something like that would happen. But again, I've got a chance to play with a lot of different players. Like I've done this tour a few times where we play the music of Jimi Hendrix, and it's put on by the Hendrix family called the Experience Hendrix Tour. And pretty much every tour that I've done, Eric Johnson has also been on. and we always end up playing songs together. And so Eric was a big hero of mine, and still I love his playing. But it was this kind of thing of like, we have different styles and we play together, but in that experience, that's a whole other thing of like, I can remember being a kid hearing his stuff and going, I could never do what he's doing. Yeah. But now here I am having to like play off of him and do things. But it's that kind of fun stuff where, as a guitar player, being put into these situations where you are going to do something that you might be terrified to do, but you're doing it anyway. Yeah. It's like, well, here I go. So even like Chick Corea, we did a tour where we played open for Return to Forever. In every show, pretty much every show, he would stand on the side of the stage and then he would look over at me and he'd be like this, meaning, can I come out and play with you? And we would bring him out and he would come out and play on a song called King Kong. And I would have to trade with him. Now, I don't have a jazz background at all. And here's a guy that can play anything, whatever off the top of his head. And every night it's going to be different. He's going to do all these amazing things. So I would hear stuff that he would do and I would just have a go at it, just try to play stuff that I would not normally play. And occasionally there would be some pretty cool stuff that would happen. But I was never like a guy that could just be like, oh, I'm going to go toe to toe with Chick Corea. But here it is, I'm put in that position. And it was super fun every time because it's not a competition. It's just like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And a few times he was using a keyboard that was an analog keyboard and it would go out of tune. And so he'd start playing stuff and I'm like, wow, he's really going out, out of space. Like, I don't know what scales these are. And then he'd come back to play the melody and his keyboard was completely out of tune. So we'd have to get him to stop playing the melody because it was, a cacophony. But those kind of things were just experiences that I look back and go, wow, that was just such a fun thing. But if you told me, hey, go play with Chick Corea, I'm like, I'm not doing that, But
sometimes you just got to say yes. You just say yes and work it out as you go, huh?
Yeah, but he was wanting to come up, so I'm like, all right, But then I'm stuck. Now I have to play with him,
Yeah, I'm the same boat, man. I can't play jazz, I can't play country, but hey, I'm happy to be rock and roll guitar player. Now,
that's
my friend
stuff.
Bernie is asking, are you still playing Optima/Maxima strings like Frank?
Well, I don't have any sets of those currently. I loved them when my dad had them on the guitars, and I remember loving changing the strings, because they were gold. But they had these other ones too that were they had a black coating on them for just the low strings.
Yep.
And I liked those as well.
That was the second part of Bernie's question. Actually, was he just said that Frank played gold and black.
Yep.
So Bernie knows his strings there.
I love those. It was cool to play on those sets of strings. I guess they're still out there. I haven't tried getting any of them for a while, but I guess it would be fun to go down memory lane and get a few sets.
They are still out there. Bernie, that just asked the question, is the Australian distributor of them. Oh, he'll send you some.
I would love it.
Okay, I'll chat to you when we go off air, and I'll line that up for you.
Great.
Jamie F., sorry you may have touched on this as I came in late, but are you still working on What the Hell Was I Thinking and any ETA on a release date?
Yes, I'm still working on it. The studio is going to be the catalyst to help me finish that. But the thing that's crazy about that is, just in a nutshell, it started on analog tape. There were some problems with the tape reels because we were on the big reels. And the motor that runs the machine, when you got to the end of those reels, it would speed up just a little bit. So anything that's in the last maybe 3 minutes of those reels, you can't do an overdub to because the pitch is changing gradually over time. And so you'd have to, like the drums, you can kind of get away with. You're not really hearing the change of pitch so drastically, but if you try to play guitar or play bass to anything and try to do an overdub, it's always going out of tune. So certain stuff, you either have to leave it exactly as it is, or you have to re-record some of those bits. But then, so that being said, that got transferred to digital tape machines, and then the digital tape machines had dropouts and erased certain sections or damaged certain sections. So then I went from that to DA88, which was in the early 90s, and I did a lot of work on those at that time. And then I, over a period of time, said, I got to get these into a computer. So about 5 years ago, a lot of the stuff went into the computer. But when they went into the computer, I had to put all that stuff in storage while we then started building this place. So it's only now that I'm trying to get some of that stuff out of storage, off of hard drives, to see if I can even fire them up, because they might not even play. Man. So
that's the thing.
This is like, it's been in production since maybe 1990, 89, 90, or somewhere is when I started working on the whole idea of what the hell was I thinking. So the ultimate goal will be to get it all into a workstation so I can start putting it together. But there's a lot of great players now that are current modern players that I'd like to get on it. So there's stuff that I'll probably take out from the original and add new stuff and make space for people. Because what this thing is, it's an audio movie, and it, from moment to moment, stylistically changes, and then it also changes in terms of the atmosphere, the room that it's in, or all the textures. You're going to hear it change as if you were turning a radio dial and tuning in a different station every so often. But all these different guitar players start falling out of the speakers. So you'll hear Angus and Malcolm Young playing on this, and they've never played on anything but AC/DC.
Wow.
You'll hear Eric Johnson, Brian May, Edward Van Halen, Steve Vai, Steve Morse, Brian Setzer, Steve Lukather, Warren DeMartini, Blue Saraceno, Joe Walsh, all these different guys, Robin Ford, all these different guys that I've recorded over the years. But there's a whole bunch of other people I want to put on there. I'd love to get Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, David Gilmour, Pete Townsend, all these guys. But it's all designed around either putting someone exactly in their wheelhouse or putting them in a totally different position to make them play on something you'd never hear them play on. You know, so like I have Yngwie Malmsteen playing on a super slow blues.
Wow.
You know, like a slow tempo blues, and he's playing like a billion notes on it. It's great, but he plays like right after Angus.
And this is your own compositions?
Yeah, so it's my own music, but all these guest players on it, and it's just drastically changed. And the whole idea is guitar, bass, and drums, and make guitar do stuff you've never heard it do before. So there's no synthesizers. It's just all guitar, playing guitar with, you know, EQing and other stuff to make it sound different at times. I do a thing like bagpipes and all kinds of stuff, you know, where you hear the guitar just taking on all these different roles. But it's a cool thing. I'll finish it one day, but I got to get it working.
I'm glad you took the time to explain what it was, because I was going to ask that. It was just like, oh, forgive me, but I'm not too sure what that is that he's asking about. How awesome. I wanted to ask you something that just popped into my mind, just talking about things that you probably took for granted, but to other people would just be mind-blowing. I heard a story about Alice Cooper coming to play for your dad and getting the AM and PM mixed up and starting to blast things at 7 a.m. at your house rather than 7 p.m., which is what he was expecting. Were you around then?
See, I don't know anything about that. That would have been really early, like 1970 something, you know, like early 70s. And, you know, I was born in 1969, so it would have been a little before my time to know what happened for stuff like that.
Sure. So it's not a memory that that springs to mind. Dweezil, you said about you haven't played much guitar during the pandemic, right. And is having extended breaks something that you do often? Because I have heard Eddie Van Halen say that when he comes off tour, he'll go a couple of years and not play. And I know I've had issues with tendonitis myself over years, and it's like, well, I
just haven't played in 6 months, and then you go to pick it up and you're just so rusty and you think, ugh. But it comes back in no time, usually better than you were before. Is it something you do quite regularly?
I have done a lot of times, and even my dad did. He never played guitar unless he was going on tour. At a certain point, after like maybe 1976, he just never would play guitar at all unless he was going on tour. He was writing music, sitting at the piano, writing notation. And for me, it's just been a balance situation, because with the amount of touring that I was doing, when I was home, I wanted to spend time with my wife and kids. I didn't want to be doing the music stuff. And so that was the real struggle. And it wasn't hard for me to put the guitar down. But when I did pick it up, what I liked about taking the break was that I would see things differently, and I would try things, and I could actually recognize, you know what, I've never played this before. I've never actually done this, and that's where some of the best new ideas came from. And it's much easier to recognize those things after a long break.
Absolutely. I'm just going to put the call out to people if they have any final questions before I round things up with you, mate. Just talking gear, are you still Axe-Effectsing, or have you tried other modelers? Because there's a whole plethora of them out there now.
Well, I've tried all the stuff that's out there, and everything's good. I know how to use the fractal, so I stick with that. But there's great stuff. That neural DSP stuff is good, and the Kemper can do some cool things. But I like the technology involved in the fractal, and as far as being able to really dive deep in the effects side of it, there's nothing better than the fractal. So you can, if you know what you're doing, you can make anything.
And have you got Axe-Effects 3 now?
Yeah.
Yep. I've heard that the latest Cygnus firmware update has made things another level again.
It always happens that way, and that's a great thing that they constantly are coming up with new ways to do it, and embellish the things that are there and open things up and give you chances to do things. What's cool is that you can do stuff that you really couldn't do in the straight up analog world. And it's just an easier way to, find your way, especially if you're blending clean sounds and dirty sounds and changing the dynamics of stuff. Like, I like to work on stuff. My dad used to really like blending direct sounds with amp sounds, because there was an immediacy of the attack of the direct sound that you didn't get with the amplifier sound. But let's say he wanted a fuzz tone on one side, and he wanted less gain on this side, but something that had more transient information. And then you also had the blend of the really compressed clean sound. That'd be tucked under, but it gives you sort of this dimension, it gives you you can almost hear all the way around the low strings, especially on a Strat. You get this definition that's there. Then you get the fuzz tone, which has its kind of own envelope of how the note will sustain. And the other transient side, which you might have less gain, but let's say it's more of like almost a Pete Townsend style, like you hit it hard and it's going to really bark at you. Now, those sounds, making them all work together as one sound, ends up sounding like two guitars playing at once, but you have the ability to have this thing where like you start something and it moves across the speakers and it kind of breathes in this way. And that's the kind of really cool stuff that my dad was doing with all the different amps and the direct boxes. But I love to be able to recreate that scenario with the Axe-Effects, and being able to do it now with the Axe-Effects 3. I can just use one Axe-Effects 3 and do what I used to have to do with two Axe-Effects 2s. So I used to use two machines and pretty much treat one side, just the left side, with one machine, and just the right side with the other machine. So because I was running out of DSP with a lot of the things that I was doing with like building these Dynaflanger style effects and other things. But now the Axe FX 3 is so powerful that you can do it all and still have some room left over in just one unit.
Wow.
And it keeps things in phase even better.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I haven't really tried the running two different rigs in parallel. Yeah, you're running those. Maybe I should look into that. It sounds like a no-brainer, really, in being able to bring that clarity to a sound that might not have it.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, the thing is, what is interesting when you are just thinking of frequency ranges and the amount of real estate in the speakers, and when you talk about like the personality of a sound, a lot of people, if they want to make a stereo sound, they think has to be the same sound on both sides, same EQ, same everything. Or, oh yeah, you know, why would you? I want it to be as drastically different as possible texturally. I want to be able to find a way to play notes that, depending on how I hit it, it's going to bloom a different way. And that's the kind of stuff that, especially when I'm playing in ears, I can hear that interplay thing, and it just feels like it's like a living, breathing organism. It's not just, oh, I'm playing, you know, and you're just hearing a standard sound out of these things. So it really puts me in a different headspace when I can feel that stuff move around as I play through it.
Cool. There is a couple more questions there, and one was, what do you see as being... Sorry, I'll start again. What does Dweezil see as his biggest similarities and differences to his dad's approach?
I mean, as far as guitar playing, I don't think there's a guitar player that's even close to my dad in terms of approach of the instrument, but his musical ideas were informed by his intellect and knowledge of music. He had enough technique on the guitar to be able to pull off the idea harmonically and rhythmically that he was going for. But he wasn't a technician, and he had this really weird idiosyncratic style of playing. So he actually had this weird motion that was very plucky, and most of it was upstrokes.
Wow.
So he would do a lot of upstroke stuff, and I always said it was like a chicken poking or pecking at seeds, and it was fighting with the spider. So the chicken versus the spider.
Wow.
Because even his left hand didn't look like what you would normally see being done on the guitar, the way he would finger things and what he would go for. So seeing that, and then being more of a technical player on my side, learning Van Halen or Randy Rhoads or you know, at a later date, the Frank and Bali style of stuff, where it's about economy of motion and precision and all this stuff. The best, most memorable players have a certain element of stuff that's in their playing that is sloppy. And if you took it out, the personality would go away. So if you took Jimi Hendrix and you put him on a grid and you perfected all of everything that he did, he would not be anywhere near as fun to listen to. Same for Jimmy Page, and certainly of my dad. So the things, if he was going for stuff, he would go for things that were beyond his ability technically.
Yeah.
But it was like, well, I'm just going for it. And if I land on my feet, great. Otherwise, you know, I got a few more minutes here and I can just do the next thing. You know, he wasn't concerned about like being a technical gymnast or an acrobat and sticking the landing. He was just like, let me try to just make some music that spontaneously compose. So it took me years to be able to get to that place, to be able to spontaneously compose or improvise in context to the music. So that's the thing that I think is more similar now, is that I have that approach and I have enough language and vocabulary to enter that arena in that way. But prior to that, I would have been more closer to just a stock rock guitar player who's got some licks and you kind of stick to your guns.
Yeah.
You know, I'm less interested in that now, and I'm interested in more textures and just like the variety of the articulations and the phrasing that you can do with the guitar. So as I get more interested in that and my own music and what I can do with that, I'm sure there will be some new things that will set what I do apart from what I have done or what my dad did. But, I feel like I'm kind of in a place where things are similar, but I still do it my own way.
Yeah. It's such an expressive instrument, isn't it? That the way you touch that piece of string, and some people might just do like a quarter note of a bend at the end of something, and it just gives it such a signature, doesn't it? Where somebody just plays it straight, and you're like, no, that's not right. And I love being a guitar player. Love being a guitar player.
The funny thing that I realized about my dad's playing, which is unusual, is a lot of times he does no vibrato. He'll just play notes and have no vibrato and not even pull them, and then it just depends on the context. Because when he does use vibrato, it's really there for a point, And so it's interesting when you think about those kind of things and being able to think about just using it when you need to make more of a statement, as opposed to like every note you're vibratoing.
Now, a great example of that is I hear people playing Steve Vai's For the Love of God, his signature tune. And the first pass through the verse is just like that. Deadpan, no vibrato, just the notes. Do, 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 do. And then when he comes through the next time and plays it, adds a bit. And then by the third time, he's just over the top with the bends and everything. And it's those little nuances, isn't it?
That's the part that, as over time, the more you play, I notice me and my friends that are similar who have been playing guitar for years, that's the stuff that stands out where you go, that's what I'm so interested in now. It's like, who are the players that had that from the beginning and focused on that?
Yeah.
The David Gilmours, or, like even Pete Townsend with the sheer violence in the way that he played, that made it sound like what it sounded like. You can't play Pete Townsend's music without actually physically having to like beat the hell out of the guitar. It's not going to sound like the way he did it,
Yeah.
And so it's stuff like that is fascinating, because when you really pick out who did it which way, you look at a guy like Yngwie who has amazing picking technique, but it barely looks like he's doing anything. It's like, It's just easy.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that Cracking the Code on YouTube. If anybody hasn't seen that, go out and check out Troy Grady. I'd love to get him on the show, actually. And that transformed my picking, my understanding of picking of fast, and how he breaks down all the different players and how some guys skip that last note and put in a pull off or a hammer on to get the pick ready to jump string and everything. So that there is a question here that relates to transforming your picking and guitar approach. It says here, this is from Jamie F. Did you find it difficult transforming your picking and guitar approach to go economy, hybrid picking, legato, etc., to tackle your dad's music? It sounds seamless now, but I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Oh yeah, it was 2 years of the thing is, like, learning the techniques is one thing, but when they become something you don't have to think about, when you start playing and it just happens naturally, that's the part that takes time. Like, I think a lot of people can learn a technique and employ it for certain things, but until they don't have to think about, oh, now it's time for me to play my sweep picking lick or whatever, when it just starts being incorporated to what you naturally do, that's the part that really takes time. And then you keep tweaking it from there. And a lot of the stuff, the hard stuff that I've had to learn, incorporates the sweep picking and hybrid picking and just straight up hammer-ons from nowhere, because some stuff is so hard just intervallically where the notes are located in my dad's music, and then rhythmically with, tuplets or, things that are hidden within a rhythm. And so there's all these tricky things that I really had to work on. So yes, it was a lot of hard work, but over time, it started to become natural for me to employ it, just because now I have an idea and I just want to see if I can make that happen.
And those things that you had to try and learn to be able to play your dad's music, where did he get that from?
Well, see, the thing is, a lot of the stuff that I played on the guitar, was never played on the guitar. So I'm talking about things that were written to be played on marimba or piano or other instruments, where they're still hard on those instruments, but they're not easy on the guitar, just because, let's say you're doing something on a marimba. Now, when you hit the marimba, as soon as you hit it, you're going to hear that note. On the guitar, you have to synchronize this hand with this hand, whereas the other one, it's just one hand and it's going straight to the note.
Yeah.
Right? So the timing between some of these things, and when you have really difficult intervallic leaps, that makes the picking really tricky, because you either have to be able to get in between multiple strings or have these big stretches. And it's the time that it takes to get from one place to another and keep that synchronized, especially when things are really fast. That's where the real struggle is. And, I mean, you can look, there's stuff like on Inca Rhoads or St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast. That's the kind of stuff that I would have to practice for hours and hours and hours for maybe 4 or 5, 6, 7 months before even thinking about playing the song even all the way through. So if you're learning something that you're spending 10 hours a day and it's only 10 seconds of music, most people would quit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another question there from John Clark. What will it take to bring guitar back to the forefront in mainstream music?
Anything can be popular if it gets exposure. If there was suddenly a band that had the qualities of Van Halen or something, and they became popular, you'd see a resurgence. It has to be that somebody wants to take that risk on exposing it massively that way. But that being said, there's tons of guitar players that are out there on YouTube and everywhere. I think guitar is pretty popular in the guitar community, and you can find a lot of guitar these days where you couldn't before. And there's a lot of different styles that are popular that you wouldn't think would be as popular. Like, it's amazing to me when I see kids that are 8, 9, 10, and the style they want to play is neo soul, and they learn all this stuff, and it's like, it's pretty jazzy and chordal and all this kind of stuff. And they got the feel, and they know the voicings, and that's the part that is crazy, because you really have to hear that in your head and really want to go for that thing and know a lot about, theory and chord progressions and stuff. So it's funny when I see like that become a big influence, or a thing where it's like, yeah, that's what got me into guitar. Like a guy like Corey Wong, like the funk rhythm stuff. There's a lot of kids that they're going to get into guitar just because of that.
Yeah. Man, there's some scary players out there now. If you go looking for it, it might not be on the radio, but if you do a search on YouTube, Instagram, etc., man, there's this young guy from Russia, Max Oslo, that I see pop up every now and then.
Yeah, he's crazy. But then you have Stephen Toronto, Tara. He's the guy from Australia, Sydney. I think he lives in Sydney, but he's insane.
What was his name again?
Stephen. Last name, I think I'm pronouncing it right. Toronto. Taranto.
I'm gonna have to look him up, get him on for a bit of a chat.
Yeah, no, he's nuts. I mean, picking wise and the arpeggios that he does, incredible.
Wow, I have to check it out. Dweezil, I'm gonna bring up one last thing, and this is I'm relaying a story that Dave Leslie told me 30 years ago, and I think it just shows the kind of humor in your family circle.
Sure.
He told me that when he came to your house, that you guys pranked him and told him, "Look, Dave, forgive me if I get the story wrong, man. It's a long time ago that you told me this, so I hope you get it right." But apparently you've said, "Look, Frank's really particular about people knowing where we live, so do you mind if we stick this bag over your head?" And Dave's like, "Yes, let's do that." Apparently everybody else was in on it, and he's driving there in the back of the car with this bag over his head, all excited. "Yeah, I'm going to meet Frank,
I have no recollection of that. There's a possibility that something like that could have happened, but it sounds too cruel for something that I would suggest.
Well, apparently, okay, if I remember correctly, when he got to the car got to the front gate, I think perhaps your brother even had the torchlight and was like, identify yourself kind of thing. And he's all excited going, yeah, yeah. And apparently the first thing when he rocked up at the door, Frank's just looked at everybody and just went, which one of you guys is Dave? And he's like, oh, me. He's just looking at him and going, gotcha.
Well, it's possible. It is possible. But it's funny how like stuff like that is things that, could be such a shining moment where that if that happened for me, I can't even recall it at this time, So it's weird. I've definitely heard stories before that where somebody's like, "Hey, remember we went to that thing and this and this and this and this happened?" I'm like, I don't remember that at all. Like, oh no, and then you were there and you said this and you did that. And I'm like,
yep,
that doesn't sound like it happened, but so
well, you did, yeah,
it's possible. So.
Dweezil, I want to thank you so much for your time, man. Coming on, a bit of a chat. There's one of the last comment there is Dweezil, you are an awesome interview. Thank you, and I totally agree.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much from everybody. Folks, you can show your appreciation with a little like and subscribe and all that kind of thing. And I will sign off and. Thank you all for your time. Bye now.
All right. Thanks.